tell you, the scream came from up there.
By 1953, Hollywood was obsessed with gimmicks. Television had invaded America's living rooms, and movie studios were scrambling for anything that could drag audiences back to theaters. Then Warner Bros. Did something audacious. They strapped polarized glasses on viewers' faces and hurled a paddleball directly at them. House of Wax wasn't just a horror film. It was an event, a spectacle, a technological marvel that proved 3D could be more than a novelty. Vincent Price cemented his legacy as horror's most elegant monster. Director Andre de Toth made a masterpiece despite being blind in one eye and unable to see the very effect that defined his film. And a generation of moviegoers learned that wax museums would never feel safe again. These are 15 shocking facts about the film that revolutionized horror and proved that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who create beauty from death. Before we melt into the madness, if you're obsessed with the golden age of horror that changed cinema forever, smash that subscribe button and leave a comment. It keeps the content flowing and the forgotten classics alive. And stick around, because what happened behind the scenes is just as twisted as what Professor Jared did to his victims. Alright, let's dive in. Number 1. It was the first major studio color 3D horror film. Warner Bros. Was desperate. By 1952, television ownership had skyrocketed, and movie attendance was plummeting. The studio needed something revolutionary, not evolutionary. They'd experimented with 3D the previous year with a short subject, but House of Wax would be their grand gamble, the first feature-length horror film shot in color 3D from a major studio. The technology was primitive and punishing. 2 massive cameras had to be perfectly synchronized, shooting simultaneously through polarized lenses. Every setup took 3 times longer than normal filming. The heat from the Technicolor lights was suffocating, and actors had to hit their marks with surgical precision, or the 3D effect would shatter. But when it worked, magic. The gamble paid off spectacularly. House of Wax became one of the biggest hits of 1953, pulling in over $5 million and igniting a 3D boom that lasted 2 years. Number 2. The director was blind in one eye and couldn't see 3D. Here's the beautiful irony. Andre de Toth, the man who directed this 3D breakthrough, was physically incapable of experiencing the effect he created. A childhood accident had left him blind in one eye, meaning he lacked stereoscopic vision, the biological mechanism that allows humans to perceive depth. He could never see the 3D imagery that made his film legendary. When Warner Bros. Offered him the project, de Toth accepted immediately, never mentioning his condition. He didn't consider it a handicap. His philosophy was simple. He could see the quality of the performances, the composition of the shots, the rhythm of the editing. The 3D was a technical flourish, not the story. He relied completely on his cinematographer Burt Glennon, and during screenings, he'd ask crew members to describe what they were experiencing. Some saw his disability as a liability. De Toth saw it as irrelevant, and history proved him right. House of Wax isn't just a gimmick film. It's a genuinely well-crafted thriller that works perfectly in 2D. The performances, the atmosphere, the gothic dread, none of that required depth perception. De Toth understood something profound. Great filmmaking transcends technology. A one-eyed director proved that vision isn't just about what you see, it's about what you understand. Number 3. Vincent Price found his signature role. Vincent Price was a classically trained actor who'd spent the previous decade bouncing between film noir, costume dramas, and character roles. He'd dabbled in horror before with films like The Invisible Man Returns, but had never found his signature role. House of Wax changed everything. Price understood that Professor Henry Jared wasn't a monster. He was a tragic artist destroyed by capitalism and betrayal, transformed into something terrible by fire and vengeance. His performance is restrained, almost operatic in its controlled fury. There's genuine sadness in his eyes when he discusses his lost sculptures, real rage when he confronts his former partner's greed. Price made Jared sympathetic even as he became monstrous. Critics noticed, audiences noticed, and suddenly, Vincent Price wasn't just another character actor, he was horror royalty. He'd spend the next 3 decades as the genre's most beloved villain, starring in the Edgar Allan Poe adaptations and cult classics that defined him. But it all started in a wax museum, playing an artist driven mad by loss. Number 4. The famous paddleball scene wasn't in the script. Every review, every retrospective, every discussion of House of Wax mentions the same moment: Barker the carnival hustler, smashing a paddleball directly toward the camera while grinning like a maniac. It became the film's most iconic shot, the sequence that sold the 3D experience to audiences worldwide, and it was completely improvised on set. The paddleball man was actually professional performer Reggie Riemel, brought in to add atmosphere during a street scene. Director Andre de Toth watched him practicing between takes and had an epiphany. This was the perfect way to showcase the 3D technology. He told Rimmel to walk toward the camera and just play. No dialogue, no story connection, just pure spectacle. The scene runs nearly a full minute, an eternity in film time, with Rimmel bouncing the ball on the paddle, grinning, moving closer and closer until the ball appears to leap off the screen into the audience's lap. Theaters erupted. People screamed, ducked, reached out trying to catch it. Warner Bros. Immediately recognized gold and featured the paddle ball prominently in every piece of promotional material. That improvised moment became House of Wax's signature, more famous than the murders, more memorable than the Wax Museum itself. Number 5. The fire scene almost killed the production. The film's opening catastrophe, the museum fire that transforms Jared from artist to monster, was the most expensive and dangerous sequence ever filmed for a Warner Brothers horror production at that time. Special effects supervisor H.F. Konekamp had to burn a massive museum set filled with elaborately crafted wax figures, while 2 synchronized 3D cameras captured every moment. The challenges were immense. The cameras had to be protected from heat and smoke. Stunt doubles had to navigate real flames while hitting precise marks for the 3D effect to work. And everything had to be captured in one take. Once the set burned, there was no reset. The night of filming was controlled chaos. Fire marshals stood ready with extinguishers. The cameras rolled, and the museum went up in spectacular flames, the heat so intense that crew members had to retreat behind protective barriers. Vincent Price's stunt double performed the horrifying sequence where Jared's hands burn, his face melts, and his dreams literally go up in smoke. When the fire finally died, the set was destroyed. The footage was captured, and Konekamp had pulled off the impossible. That fire sequence set the template for every transformation by trauma narrative that followed. It showed audiences exactly what broke Jared, making his later monstrousness comprehensible if not forgivable. The production spent 1/5 of its budget on that single sequence. It was worth every dollar. Number 6. Phyllis Kirk refused to scream on command. Actress Phyllis Kirk, cast as Sue Allen, the film's resourceful heroine who discovers Jared's terrible secret, had one major problem with her role: the constant screaming. Horror films of the era expected actresses to shriek hysterically at every monster appearance, but Kirk found it demeaning and unrealistic. She approached director Andre de Toth with a proposal: let Sue be smart, not just scared. Let her think, act, fight back. De Toth agreed. The result was one of the more proactive heroines in 1950s horror. Yes, Sue screams when appropriate, like when she discovers her friend's corpse encased in wax, or when Jared tries to dip her in molten wax, but she also investigates, pieces together clues, and actively tries to escape rather than just waiting for rescue. Kirk's Sue Allen became a prototype for the intelligent horror heroine, a woman who uses her mind as much as her lungs. Film historians later noted that Kirk's refusal to play the damsel in distress archetype gave House of Wax a progressive edge, unusual for the era. She wasn't just screaming set dressing. She was a character. De Toth supported this because he respected performers who questioned lazy writing. That collaboration created a heroine audiences could root for rather than pity. Number 7. The film featured eerily realistic wax figures. To make the museum's exhibits as unsettling as possible, production designer Stanley Fleischer created meticulously detailed wax figures that captured human features with disturbing precision. The faces in Jared's museum had an uncanny quality, something that registered subconsciously as wrong. They were too lifelike, too specific. Fleischer understood that authenticity breeds unease. The figures needed to look real enough to make the audience question what they were seeing. When the camera lingers on them, there's something deeply disturbing about their frozen expressions and eerily accurate proportions. The museum set became filled with silent witnesses, anonymous faces given life as entertainment props. No one in 1953 audiences could articulate why the figures felt so unsettling, but they felt it. The figures looked too real because the craftsmanship was exceptional. It's a detail that elevates House of Wax from mere thriller to something approaching gothic nightmare, a place where the line between living and dead, real and artificial, becomes terrifyingly blurred. Number 8. Igor was played by future Western icon Charles Bronson. The mute, disfigured assistant who helps Jared commit his terrible crimes is named Igor, a name that had become shorthand for horror movie henchman despite never appearing in the original Frankenstein. That role was played by Charles Bukinski, a 32-year-old character actor who'd spent the previous decade in bit parts and B-westerns. This was his first significant role in a major studio production. Bukinski's Igor is tragic and terrifying, a man with severe facial deformities and no voice, communicating only through grunts and desperate gestures. He's Jared's slave and enabler, but there's humanity in the performance, a sense that Igor is as much a victim as the people he helps murder. Critics took notice, audiences remembered him, and Hollywood started calling. Within 2 years, Bukinski would change his name to Charles Bronson and begin the long climb toward stardom, By the 1970s, he'd be one of cinema's most bankable action stars, the face of vigilante justice and tough guy cinema, but it all started in a wax museum, playing a voiceless monster who communicated everything through his eyes. Bronson later said House of Wax taught him that presence mattered more than dialogue. You could own a scene without saying a word. Number 9. The wax dipping scene traumatized a generation. The film's climax, where Jared straps Sue Allen to a tilting platform and prepares to lower her into a vat of molten wax while she's still alive, became the stuff of childhood nightmares for everyone who saw it. The sequence is relentless. We watch Jared explain his process, describing how the wax will preserve her beauty forever. We see Sue struggling against her bonds. We watch the platform tilt, inch by terrible inch, lowering her face first toward the steaming liquid. And then, in the 3D version, the wax seems to reach out toward the audience. Theater owners reported children screaming, adults covering their eyes, people fleeing to the lobby. It wasn't graphic by modern standards. We never actually see Sue dipped, but the psychological torture was devastating. Director Andre de Toth understood something essential. The anticipation of horror is often worse than the act itself. By drawing out Sue's terror, by making the audience imagine her fate, he created something more disturbing than any explicit violence could achieve. The scene was so effective that it influenced horror filmmakers for decades. The slow-moving death trap, the villain explaining his process, the helpless victim approaching doom. This template appears in countless films afterward. But House of Wax did it first, and arguably best. That scene alone justified the price of admission and the 3D glasses. Number 10. Warner Brothers sent nurses to theaters. The studio's marketing department, sensing they had something genuinely disturbing on their hands, deployed a brilliant and shameless publicity stunt borrowed from earlier horror productions. They stationed nurses in theater lobbies dressed in full uniform, complete with medical bags, standing by to assist patrons who might be overcome by the film's terrors. It was pure theater, of course. The nurses were hired performers with no medical training, instructed to look professional and concerned. Their real job was to generate buzz, and it worked magnificently. Newspapers ran photos of the nurses standing at attention. Radio ads breathlessly warned audiences to see House of Wax if you dare. Medical assistance available for those who can't handle the horror. The stunt created an aura of genuine danger around the film, suggesting it was so frightening that viewers might actually need medical intervention. Teenagers flocked to prove they could handle it. Parents brought children to test their courage, and the nurses stood there, looking official, occasionally offering smelling salts to audience members who got too into the performance. It was exploitation marketing at its finest, making the film feel like a test of endurance rather than entertainment. Number 11. A future TV icon had her first major film role. Carolyn Jones, who would later become famous as Morticia Addams in the 1960s television series The Addams Family, played Kathy Gray, Sue Allen's friend who becomes one of Jared's victims. At the time, Jones was a relative unknown trying to break into Hollywood, and House of Wax gave her valuable exposure in a major studio production. Her role is small but memorable, the tragic figure whose death sets the investigation in motion. Jones brings vulnerability and warmth to the character, making her fate genuinely affecting rather than just another body count. The role helped launch her career, leading to more substantial parts throughout the 1950s. Years later, when she became a household name as the macabre matriarch of the Addams Family, horror fans delighted in the connection. Morticia Addams had gotten her start in a wax museum, facing down Vincent Price. It was perfect symmetry, two icons of Gothic entertainment connected by this seminal horror film. Number 12. Vincent Price was a genuine Renaissance man. Vincent Price wasn't just acting when he played the cultured artistic Professor Jared, he brought genuine intellectual credibility to the role. Price held a master's degree in art history from Yale, was an accomplished art collector, and had studied music extensively during his education. He could legitimately discuss art theory, classical music, and aesthetic philosophy. This background transformed his horror performances. When Jared waxes poetic about beauty and art, we're not watching an actor recite lines, we're watching someone who actually understood what he was saying. Price's genuine passion for art and culture gave his characters depth and authenticity that couldn't be faked. Throughout his career, Price leveraged his education to become more than just a horror star. He hosted art documentaries, wrote cookbooks, lectured on art history, and became a passionate advocate for making art accessible to ordinary Americans. House of Wax showcased what would become his signature approach, bringing intelligence and sophistication to roles that could have been one-dimensional. He understood that monsters are more frightening when they're cultured, when they appreciate beauty even as they create atrocity. Number 13. The deaf-mute character sparked controversy. The character of Igor, Charles Bronson's voiceless, disfigured assistant, drew criticism from disability advocacy groups even in 1953. Organizations representing deaf and facially disfigured communities objected to the film's portrayal of disability as inherently villainous and monstrous. They argued that Igor perpetuated harmful stereotypes, that people with communication disabilities were less than human, that facial differences made someone frightening, that being mute meant being stupid or dangerous. Warner Bros. Largely ignored these complaints, which were far less organized and visible than modern activism, but some film critics of the era noted the problematic implications. Director Andre de Toth later defended the choice, arguing that Igor was portrayed as a victim of Jared's manipulation rather than an inherently evil character. But the damage was done. The film became another entry in Hollywood's long history of equating physical disability with moral corruption. It's one of the few elements of House of Wax that hasn't aged well. Modern viewers recognize the ableism embedded in Igor's characterization, even as they appreciate Bronson's performance. It serves as a reminder that even classics contain the prejudices of their era, and that we can acknowledge both a film's artistry and its failures. Number 14. The film was remade in 2005 with mixed results. 52 years after the original terrified audiences, Warner Bros. Returned to the property for a complete remake, this time with digital 3D technology and modern horror sensibilities. The 2005 House of Wax, directed by Joma Colicera and starring Elisha Cuthbert and Paris Hilton, kept the core concept, a madman creating wax figures with human corpses inside, but updated everything else. The setting shifted from early 1900s New York to contemporary Louisiana. The victims became teenagers on a road trip, and the violence, freed from 1950s censorship restrictions, became graphic and intense. Critically, the remake was savaged. Audiences enjoyed it as disposable horror entertainment, and it made modest profits, but it lacked the gothic elegance and tragic undertones that made the original memorable. Vincent Price's nuanced, sympathetic monster was replaced by generic slasher villains. The art versus commerce themes disappeared. What remained was competent but forgettable, a slick product without soul. The remake's failure to capture what made the original special actually enhanced the 1953 film's reputation. Critics revisiting the original for comparison pieces suddenly appreciated how sophisticated and restrained it was. The remake proved that technology evolves but craft is timeless. You can improve the effects, but you can't recreate genius. Number 15. The film launched a 3D revolution that quickly died. House of Wax's massive success triggered an immediate gold rush. Every studio scrambled to produce 3D films, convinced they'd found the answer to television's threat. Throughout 1953 and 1954, audiences were bombarded with 3D westerns, 3D musicals, 3D science fiction, even 3D film noir. The problem? Most of them were terrible. Studios rushed productions to capitalize on the trend, sacrificing quality for gimmick. The technology was expensive and difficult, requiring careful calibration that many productions couldn't afford or didn't understand. Audiences grew tired of uncomfortable glasses and dim, blurry projections from theaters that couldn't maintain the equipment properly. By 1955, the 3D craze was over. Studios abandoned the format, projectionists breathed sighs of relief, and House of Wax stood as both the beginning and peak of the movement. It took nearly 30 years before filmmakers attempted 3D again in the 1980s, and another 2 decades before digital projection finally solved the technical problems. House of Wax proved that 3D could work when deployed by talented filmmakers with adequate budgets and genuine artistic vision. But it also proved that gimmicks only succeed when the substance underneath is solid. The 3D brought audiences in, the craft kept them terrified, and that's a lesson Hollywood keeps learning and forgetting with every technological revolution. So which fact about House of Wax shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the films that changed horror forever, hit that subscribe button, because the best stories come from the intersection of desperation, genius, and just enough budget to be dangerous.